Hi, I'm Damion from Luxury Property Partners. Today I valued the most beautiful terraced house, and I thought today I would do an article on what terraced houses are and why they're so popular here in Oxfordshire. So the terraced house is one of the most familiar styles of home in the UK and particularly Oxfordshire. 27% of Oxfordshire people live in a terraced house, and it's interesting when you compare with the national average of 23%. So what is it about the humble terraced townhouse that us Brits love so much? In my article today, I want to look at the history of the terraced house, how it relates to Oxfordshire, and what the future holds for terrace properties. So a terraced home is a property built as part of a continuous row of 3 or more properties in a similar and uniform style. The reason the British call them terraced houses and not row houses came about because in the 18th century, British architects borrowed the phrase terrace from terraced gardens. Terraced gardens were known for their uniform nature in looks, style, and in height. So the architects decided to name them the same way as opposed to a row house. In fact, most countries they are called row houses. But the terraced house originated in the Low Countries of Europe in the late 1500s, and terrace houses were first built in mass in the UK after the Great Fire of 1666 with the rebuilding of London. They became fashionable for the landed gentry in the early Georgian era, with chic and stylish terraces appearing in the London Mayfair and Bath with its Queen Square, the forerunner of the famous Royal Crescent, and were sometimes built around a garden square. However, it wasn't until the early 1800s that the terrace house turned out to be the solution to the increasing population of towns, as more and more people were attracted to towns and cities for their work. The terraced house fell out of favour with the upper middle class in the late Victorian age in the late 1870s, as they wanted more privacy and of course more space. They moved to live in detached houses or semi-detached villas as the terrace house started to become more associated with the lower middle and working classes. With all these terrace houses being built, their quality of construction and design dropped as builders tried to squeeze more profit. And the biggest issue was that most of the terrace houses built in the early to mid-Victorian age were made back to back with no rear garden, causing unsanitary conditions. Therefore, Public Health Act of 1875 was introduced to regulate the building of terrace houses with design and standards. These new building standards in the Act improved the terrace house's ventilation and, more importantly, required the house to have a toilet, frequently built outside. To meet these new building standards, the design of these new houses created the well-known landscape of grid streets lined with 2-story terraces serviced by a pedestrian path in between them, and the name was it was a hotly debated topic. The various names for the pathway included alleyway, jitty, cut, ginnel, snicket, passageway. There was a variety of them, and as an Oxfordshire resident, why not to say what you should call them? You know, let me know in the comments what you feel is right. But as we enter the 20th century, the terraced house continued to be popular, albeit with some architectural additions. The advent of art and craft architecture with the stained glass windows, Tudor style cladding, ornate porches and elaborate chimney stacks. And after the First World War and the introduction of the Housing and Town Planning Act 1919, which made local council build council houses, the Victorian terrace rapidly became associated with overcrowding and slums, especially those back-to-back terraced houses built before 1875. And many of the back-to-back terraced houses were knocked down between 1930 and 1960 and is known what the slum clearances, they called it. And private builders started building the iconic suburban semi-detached houses with more extensive gardens, and local authorities decided to build high-rise blocks after World War II. Yet after the partial collapse of Ronan Point in 1968, the popularity of high-rise tower blocks, it waned. Since the early 1990s, though, the terraced house has steadily come back into favour as building land prices have increased by 300% in the last 30 years. Many private builders have started to build modern 3-storey townhouses in rows of 5 to 7. This terraced townhouse style allows 3 and 4 bedrooms on a land footprint that would have usually only accommodated a smaller 2-bedroom property. So let's look at some interesting stats that I found on Oxfordshire terraced houses. So there are 16,000 terraced houses in Oxfordshire, broken down as 9,000 privately owned terraced houses, 3,000 terraced council houses, and about 4,000 in the private rented sector. 25.4% of terraced houses in Oxfordshire are in the private rented sector, which is above the national average of 19%. The most expensive terraced house in Oxfordshire ever sold was in Parktown at 25 million in 2017. The cheapest Oxford terrace house sold in the last 2 years was on Oakwood Way, a terrace house for 139,000. Terraced houses in Oxford sell for an average of £454 per square foot. And I hope you found that slightly thought-provoking. So why is a terrace house, be it a red brick Victorian house or a more modern 3-storey townhouse, still so popular today in Oxfordshire? Well, they're typically very well built, cheaper to maintain, and especially the older terraced houses comparatively spacious and in good locations. Many terraced houses have been improved and extended through the inventive use of rear gardens, yards, and converted roof spaces. Their unpretentious design remains adaptable enough for 21st century living, and what isn't there to like about them? These are my thoughts. Tell me your thoughts. The Oxfordshire market is very versatile, especially at the moment. I hope you're enjoying the sunny weather. This is Damion Merry for Luxury Property Partners, and I look forward to seeing you soon.